So let's get started, everyone. I'd like to welcome Glen Rockers, as we like to say in social media. We're here to talk about Glen Rock and the economy. Will Glen Rockers be able to retire here? It's a good question. I'm Becky Greene, your host and your local reporter from TAPinto.net. And we have about 90 sites up and down New Jersey, a little bit in upstate New York, and we reach all the way down into Florida. Hyper local news at its best, if I may say so. And I'm sure everyone here will attest to. I have some great guests here tonight, and they're people that know lots and lots about Glen Rock. First, we have our mayor, Mayor Kristine Morieko. Then we have Jim Morgan, and we also have Nick Stratton. I'd also like to welcome Regina Egea. Regina is the president and CEO of the Garden State Initiative, and she's here to offer us a state perspective. No municipality is alone in New Jersey. There's always somebody else near or far that has some kind of perspective or is going through similar to what we're going through here. So Regina's going to bring that perspective to us throughout the night. Now, Christina was born Kristine. I want to say Christina. There's no A on the end of her name. It's Kristine. Kristine was born and raised in Glen Rock and was elected to the council in 2015. She became mayor at the beginning of 2020, which was not easy, not an easy year. Jim Morgan partners with his daughter Sally as the co-owner of The Curious Reader, a children's bookstore on Rock Road. Nick Stratton is an estate lawyer who I met through the Glen Rock Chamber of Commerce. Both Jim and I and Nick are on the chamber, and we all serve on the executive board, happily. So for our panelists tonight, I want to say, please feel free. If I go on to another question, you can kind of reel me back in, raise your hand, whatever you need to do to add to what we're talking about, so we don't move on too quickly. And I also want to remind our guests that are joining us tonight that we are taking questions in the chat, which will start approximately 8:10, 8:15 or so. So I want to start with Regina tonight. And Regina, I would love to hear kind of your state perspective on what our economy is like right now, and as we are easing back into life after COVID, on the edge of COVID, what's going on in the state, and what is your mission from the Garden State Initiative? What are you bringing to the table tonight?
Great. Thanks a lot, Becky. And thanks for everyone for being here tonight. I think I'll start with the last part first. So to introduce the Garden State Initiative, it is a nonprofit, nonpartisan think tank focused on the economy here in New Jersey. And particularly what we like to call upon is comparing our economy and our performance at, some high level and some more tactical levels compared to other states. How are we doing? That's really the test in our minds about, are we maximizing the potential for the state and, bringing everything that we possibly can to bear. So to your second or one part of your question, Becky, the pandemic, of course, has been challenging, particularly in the Northeast and particularly in the tri-state area. But as you noted, coming out of it, at this point is, tremendous relief. And like many places, we are seeing much more activity going on now. You can see it in the roads, particularly. A lot of the traffic has returned. And so you can see it, with more people walking down the streets in the downtown areas. But we also, though, are continuing to suffer, and I'm sure we're going to talk about a couple parts of this. One is some of the challenges Jim would know as a small business owner. Many of the small businesses were not able to sustain some of the challenges on the revenue side and the ongoing challenges during the pandemic. So I think we saw 30 to 40%, depending upon which numbers you look at, of restaurants were not able to survive it. Many downtown areas have been shuttered, primarily in the small business category. So they were the hardest hit, I would say, at this point. And there have been, some tactics that have been employed by other states that I think, we ought to consider more seriously. Things like, tax holidays and other things we can talk about later on tonight. I guess as a closing remark, I would say the surprising part, and one that's being talked about at the state level right now, is the incredible resilience of tax revenues at the state level. In fact, for those of us who watch the state level, we have brought in more state tax revenues this year than we did last year, in spite of anticipating that there would be a faltering of it. And so there is an amassing of enormous amounts of cash. And one of the key questions is what to do with that cash. So I'll be curious, as during our conversation tonight, retirement, is an issue. When we did research, both a couple of years ago, we refreshed our research earlier this year. Those who are planning for retirement and those who are currently in retirement have the greatest concerns about the cost of living and some of the challenges that we have here in the state. So I'm looking forward to the conversation, focusing on that, particularly in Glen Rock. So thanks a lot, Becky, for having me, and I look forward to conversation.
Well, thanks, Regina. That's a good starter. And when we talk about retirement, or even getting near retirement, I think the cost of housing is a big deal, right? So I want to talk to Kristine about this a little bit. I know yesterday even the council had talked about an ordinance, either was introduced, I don't think it was on second reading, where you guys were talking about low to income, the rates. So it's this much percentage and this much percentage. And I think those are in new housing developments, right? But that set aside, I think it's very hard to find housing right now. And I wonder if you could talk a little bit about the senior housing in Glen Rock. I know there is a development there I believe you can talk about how it's owned by the town, or explain that to us a little bit. So talk about senior housing a little bit in Glen Rock.
30 years ago, more than 30 years ago now, the town bought land and produced a beautiful building called Glen Courts, which is for 62 and up. It was primarily focused for residents, and then it was extended to, parents of residents, former residents. You had to have a connection to the town in order to get an apartment in Glen Courts. And they had a pilot, so they paid very low property taxes, and they had a mortgage. And that mortgage expired, I want to say it was 2016. They had a little mortgage burning party. And then everyone got nervous because the thought was, okay, it was in control of a board of trustees that runs it. And they were concerned, the residents, when I say they, were concerned that the borough was going to take ownership of the building back and raise everybody's rates, and the property taxes were then going to go through the roof. And at that time, I was on the council, and I was a member of the Glen Courts trustees. And we worked with then Mayor Packer and said, let them keep doing what they're doing. The taxes, of course, were adjusted because the pilot had expired. But what they've really done at Glen Courts is keep it affordable. It's actually below market rate. And I reached out to Beth Dell, who runs Glen Courts, yesterday, and I just asked her for a breakdown. So there's 80 rental apartments. There's one studio, 45 one bedroom, and 34 two bedrooms. And there's no wait list. There's no standard wait of time to get in there. It basically works on happenstance. People have been known to put a deposit down and get on the list. And then I've heard stories for years that, oh, the list is 10 years long. But what really happens is, as an apartment becomes vacant, they start going down that list. And if they were to call, say I was 62 and I was on that list, they call me tonight and say, hey, we have an apartment available. Do you want it? Well, I would have to list my house, sell my house, figure out what I'm going to do. So most people be like, no, not this time. Just keep me on the list. Get back to me. So if you're ready to move in, I think you can get in much easier and quicker than people assume. The one bedrooms rent for $1,160 a month to $1,538. It's very affordable. A 2-bedroom goes for $1,400 to $1,800 per month. Now, also keep in mind, this building is now 32 years old. It's antiquated. It needs a lot of upgrades. So what the trustees did was they took whatever balance they had in the bank, and they planned and they thought long and hard about it. And now what they do is, as a unit becomes available, they upgrade that unit. They're putting, it used to just be throw some paint, new carpeting, next, here's your key. But now they're actually going back and they're making improvements to the kitchen. They're changing the functionality in the bathrooms. I think it was dependent upon which unit you were speaking to, but they are making these improvements. And I know they have a long-term plan. So they've been very responsible. So basically the borough has left it to the trustees to maintain and continue forward with that mission. The one thing I do need to add is it is not an assisted living facility.
Mhm.
I think some people assume like, oh, my mom's getting old, she can't be home alone anymore, I'm just going to put her in Glen Courts. It doesn't work like that. There are people that have home health aides that come in and out, but it's really not meant for assisted living. And I think it would be wonderful if we had the space to have an assisted living facility in town. But honestly, going through our affordable housing settlement, we always knew, but we have on paper now that we have 0 vacant land in the borough. Every last bit is taken. It's like 99% or 91% residential, and the rest is very small, and that's the commercial and the de-industrial zone. So there was talk years back about building a second Glen Courts, but then becomes the onus on the borough. Where do we get the money? Where do we find the land? Because not only would we have to purchase land that's currently existing in a different use, then we have to build on that land. And then we have to find someone to manage that land. And it's a very big and arduous process. And from what I can recall, they really couldn't find a proper location where it would work. Glen Courts, where it is today, works. It's right in the middle of town. It's walkable. It allows for those seniors to be able to walk out their front door and go to Kilroy's or go to the Glen Rock Inn and grab dinner. There really isn't that type of property the size that we would need within our downtown area. But I will say that I think the original question you had sent me is, are there any other future developments contemplated? And I don't want to tell tales outside of school, as they always say, but I will be honest and say that there is a very strong possibility that by the end of this year, there will be someone that comes before the planning board with an option to build based upon the ordinances that we passed last night, first reading. So we had to put overlay zones. That was a way to get to our affordable housing number. And with that, we took—
That doesn't include the ones that were passed prior, right? The ones that were passed when Mayor Packer was in, there was, I'm sorry, I can't remember the street, but there were
Bradford.
8 units. It wasn't senior housing per se.
No. And we have an obligation from the state that we have to have X amount of units based upon your population and your density, that you need to have a certain percentage of affordable, because the idea is parity for everyone, that every town should have the entire spectrum of the population living there. It shouldn't just be for, a certain income level and only. It has to be, for everyone. So yes, at Bradford Street, we got, I think there's 5 bedrooms there, and it's special needs housing. So we get credit for 10 units. There's a big math formula, which is very complex and insane. But that number did count for our settlement that we did in 2019. We signed the settlement agreement. But with that settlement agreement, we also had to make plans going forward, because in 2025, Fair Share is going to come back and say, okay, here's your next number you have to meet. And it was hard enough to get it this time. So with that,
I remember the hullabaloo around it. And I kind of want to bring in Regina a little bit, because, man, does she understand this state level stuff, with COA, the Council on Affordable Housing, all the iterations that has gone through. So Regina, could you speak to that a little bit and tell me that every town has to be going through this?
Sure, sure. And Kristine, I love the dog noises, by the way.
You know?
Muting myself. I told you he has a squeaky.
Yes, you did. That's okay. Yes, so I also, in addition to having worked in the Trenton and in administration, I also was on our township committee as well as the Board of Ed. So I've continued to stay close on these issues from both sides of it. And definitely Glen Rock is not alone in terms of the challenges that are presented with the, as Kristine said, the objective of wanting to have a range of options for individuals in any one of these towns. The problem is it's a kind of top down, and what you get is a cookie cutter, negotiation and numbers that end up in towns that, really have very unique circumstances. So there were tools that, previously were available in COA. For example, some of the rights could be sold and swapped with other towns. And Kristine, I see you, nodding your head. That was a very useful tool, both in terms of towns that wanted to put more affordable housing in and others that are having trouble finding spots, as Kristine just outlined. And I think the goal would be, because right now it's being overseen in the courts as opposed to the legislature. And I think that's been one of the pushes from the legislature to try to get that back, where people who have experience and are involved at the township committee and the county level to get back and try to create something that really works for a variety of circumstances, not cookie cutter it in.
And this is, to me, it's a 50-year issue because Mount Laurel happened, I believe, in the late 70s. Around that.
70s. Mm-hmm.
I first started.
Mount Laurel too.
Yeah.
Right.
There's been many iterations from when this began. And I love that you brought up that point, Regina, about in the past, you could actually buy, so Glen Rock could buy property and say Fairlawn and put our affordable housing in Fairlawn. But does that really stick to the honor and the mission of the purpose of affordable housing? That's basically saying that if your town has enough money, you can put it somewhere else. And I don't think that was very fair. And that's why they no longer allow that at this time. But with that being said, what we had to do to get to our number is we had to put overlay zones. And this is what you mentioned earlier. So the magic number is 5. And if you're going to build from scratch, any new development, which has 5 units or more, if they are for sale units, 20% have to be 15% have to be affordable. If they are rental units, 20 and 15. I
remember the numbers from last night you mentioned.
Right, but 5 is the magic number. So if we were to do, if there was already an existing 5-unit building anywhere in town, which there isn't, that would also kick in. But 5 is the magic number that these ordinances will then go into effect. So what we did was we put overlay zones over the downtown. So the thought was, if someone were to buy, I'll use Jim's building, for example, and they wanted to put it, well, or if you own it, if you wanted to put a second floor and have rental units up there, if you wanted to do that, if you had more than 5, then, one of them would have to be affordable. And that was to promote adding more residents downtown so that this way our stores would have more foot traffic, and more opportunities for people to be out and about.
It's curious that you say that, because that was kind of where my next thought was going to, Jim, because I know foot traffic is so huge for you. Mm-hmm. And how has, when you look at the downtown, which is, I mean, there's no blame here. COVID did its job, that it's just did what it did, and it closed a lot of storefronts. Mm-hmm. I want to know how that's affected you, and the whole idea of keeping that foot traffic downtown. I know it all plays in together. So if you could talk to that a little bit and how it's affected your business.
Sure. Well, I could start off with the background that I'm probably the only retiree on this call, technically. I'm partners with my daughter in the store, but I'm 72. So I've already done a downsize, and I don't live in Glen Rock. I live right over the border in Bel Air condominiums, which are just about 100 yards from Glen Rock. When I pull up my weather, it says Glen Rock on it. We bet, and I'll tell you one other just personal note, Kristine, I envy you. I really feel sorry for you because I was on the Board of Education in Ridgewood for 8 years and stepped down last February. They didn't want to run for re-election, so I got out of it just at the right time. I feel sorry for you getting into it right at the wrong time. But Becky, you're right. We're a downtown business. We have had wonderful support from the community during the COVID problems. In fact, our business is doing very well as a result of all the parents that have come in and the value they put in Chris and Sally's these references and research. They can tell their kids what they should not be reading, what's going to develop the child. So that has been good for us, but it has not been good for a lot of other businesses downtown. You walk around, I think the other day I counted 14 open storefronts. And then a town the size of Glen Rock, that's a lot of open storefronts. And the storefronts that are still there, so not all of them are really looking for downtown walk-in traffic. Some of them are appointment type places like the dance studios. We need more kind of businesses like ourselves, like Carrickmore, or like I'm trying to remember my friend next door's name now. The Creative Den.
Yes.
Carl, kill me if she's on this call. But yes, these are businesses that need walk-in. And walk-in is actually an important thing. The basis of this conversation is about retiring in Glen Rock. One of the great things about Glen Court is it's right around the corner from the downtown. So we see people from Glen Court walking up and down the street and sometimes stopping in the stores, sometimes not, but they need walking stores to get to. They don't want to necessarily get a transportation organization. I know that's complex, it's sometimes expensive, but Glen Rock's a great place because we've got a very viable supermarket right downtown. It's not a big chain supermarket, but it's a very nice supermarket, very friendly supermarket. Reminds me of when I was a kid, the kind of supermarkets we had then. It's a perfect thing for a downtown and a perfect thing for a retiree. We need more walk-in type businesses, more things that people would go to stop in to buy a gift, to buy some clothing. We used to have a number of clothing stores in Glen Rock a long time ago. I'm old enough, I grew up in Wyckoff back in the 60s, so I remember back when a number of the stores were around. And we need some more of those kind of businesses. What?
I don't believe you.
You don't believe me?
No, they grew up in the 60s in Wyckoff.
Oh, really? Well, I hope that was a compliment. But looking at it, I'm very interested in what kind of help the town can give to supporting the landlords. The landlords rent these properties, and they benefit from the rents. We, as the storefronts, benefit from the increased foot traffic. It's something that goes hand in glove. I don't think our landlords and our tenants really talk very often, but there is one body in town that we all have to talk to, and that's the local government. There's a way of encouraging local government to work with the landlords, work with the tenants, and try and reach out to find more businesses to move into Glen Rock. The one comment we get frequently when people come to town for the first time and come into the store is, "My goodness, this is such a cute little town. You have such a nice downtown." And that's true, but we've got to encourage other businesses to come downtown into our downtown so that we can make it an even more viable, more vibrant place. The COVID situation has knocked out a lot of stores and has made stores reevaluate what they're doing. But it is at the same time create opportunity for some storefronts. And I think the landlords are going to have to understand what the state of the market is to rent those spaces. And I think the town has to, I would love to see the town help cooperate with the Chamber of Commerce, the Glen Rock Guild, the Downtown Development Authority, all these groups coming together to find a way to make us attractive as a destination for not just people coming to shop, but for businesses looking for a new location.
Well, I think that's, because my mind just exploded on 10 different areas, but before I go to that.
It's because I was 72, I know.
So before I go to that, I just want to pull Nick in a little bit here because Nick is the guy that people go to when they say, "Hey, I'm thinking about retiring. What are some of the things that I need to think about? And what are some of the things that you think Glen Rock offers? Hey, they can stay here, they can do this and that, but here's what you need to do. Here's what you need to start thinking about right now, because forget when you're 30, because most 30-year-olds don't think of that. So let's say 50. Talk to us, Nick, about that a little bit.
The biggest problem that comes to me is people who are 50 or 60 or 70 and they haven't done any planning, right? And that's something that, you know, really people should be thinking about, you know, where are we going to live, right? How are we going to afford if we can't get into Glen Courts, right? How are we going to stay in our house? How are we going to pay for our retirement, right? You know, people don't have those classic, you know, pension plans anymore, right? That paid out their whole salary for their whole life. And so, you know, the pieces I do, right? Wills and trust and things, that's, you know, secondary, right? The first thing people really need, they need to figure out what their finances are, right? People don't take the time to say, how is, you know, my Social Security going to impact my retirement, right? Have I planned long-term? Have I figured out what I can afford? You know, how does Medicare impact, you know, my insurance? All those questions, right? And there are so many professionals in Glen Rock that I've met who are on the chamber who can help with those various things, right? And then as people age, they need to think about the long term, right? What happens when, so Glen Courts is not assisted living, right? Well, what happens if you need assisted living? You know, how are you going to afford that? How are you going to pay for that, right? What if that's not enough, right? What if you need more? What if you need an aide full time? How are you going to pay for that?
Or what
right?
if, or what
And there are services.
stay in your home, Nick? What if you really want to stay
Yeah.
in your home?
Well, that's a great point. And
that's a huge
and
thing.
and so many people come in and they say either, you know, I'm never leaving my home, right? Like I lived here for the last 40 years. I'm not leaving this home. And, you know, daughter, you better figure out a way to keep me in this house, right? Mm-hmm. And it puts it all on the daughter. And that's not a great solution because, you know, the daughter's not a nurse, she's a teacher and she's got her own kids and the whole thing, right? You know, there's Medicaid, right? And Medicaid has waiver programs, managed long-term services support, right? Where you can stay in your home and get Medicaid to pay for some of that care. But, you know, Medicaid is for people who don't have any money. So how do you qualify for that type of program while you're living in Glen Rock, right? And those are things that I can help people plan with. But really, from my perspective, details aside, it's about the planning. It's about thinking about how are we going to stay in Glen Rock? How are we going to plan 10, 20 years down the road, right? And that's what too many people kind of forget about.
And I think that's really crucial, the planning part. And it really stinks that, you know, you only really think about that when it's coming closer to play. But I was thinking a little bit about what Jim said as well, about, you know, what can we do about bringing businesses back around? And I think Regina had mentioned some things, the tax holiday thing. I'm old enough to remember when Mayor Giuliani in New York brought a tax holiday. I'm not exactly sure, but I think it was a month where you didn't have to pay tax for anything you bought in New York City. So those are the kind of things. I know Glen Rock's kind of small. I don't see, and Kristine can speak to this in a little bit. Wait, hold on one sec, because I'll bring Regina first, and I'm gonna come to you, Kristine. Maybe some of those programs that we talked about, a tax holiday, all of a sudden just saying, hey, we're gonna just reduce, we're gonna cut and slash, and then what do we do from there? But what are some of the programs you've either seen in other states or other municipalities maybe that help draw people and businesses in?
Yeah, sure. I'll give you both examples. Both at the state level. So New Mexico and Colorado both have been instituting tax holidays in two different forms over the last 6 months to try to assist the businesses in a very direct way without increasing bureaucracy and creating programs, which is really a lot of complaints, you know, that come along and everywhere on, you know, when you're trying to introduce a program especially during the pandemic. So what they've done is they called it a sales tax holiday, so that when the customer comes into the retail business, that the retail business will collect sometimes the full sales tax, and then the business will keep that sales tax. It's, in other words, refundable, so they never have to deliver it to the state, and it helps create cash flow into the business in a very easy and direct way. Or another alternative is to, when the client comes through the door, they split the sales tax. So the client doesn't pay half of it. So they only pay half of the sales tax rate. In our case, it would be 3.1%. And the business never has to render the other 3.1% to the state. It's forgiven. And so again, it creates cash flow for the business, as well as it reduces the cost for the client when they come into the business. So those are other states, like I said, New Mexico and Colorado were the lead states who have been using sales tax as a mechanism to get people through the door. I think what Jim said is true everywhere. What businesses really want are getting clients back through the door, back into their businesses, and getting back to interacting and making those purchases. Now, inside New Jersey, what I've seen in other states, and you guys have been on the chamber, so you've probably heard about this, the whole idea of creating, in your case, it would be like Glen Rock bucks, so that when somebody shops in a Glen Rock store, that they accumulate credit, or, you can do it in many different forms, but then they become usable in other Glen Rock stores, and it's supported by the township usually, and generally there are some state programs that can help support that as well. But, that would also be more creativity around that, I'm sure, at the state level. So there's lots of ways to, incentivize it.
I to your point, that I'm starting because I think Kristine might be able to speak to this. Was there a program like that in Glen Rock a bit ago? Maybe Mayor Pecker had.
It wasn't Glen Rock bucks. It was a property tax program. So if you shopped local, Jim, were you a member of that? Did you subscribe to that?
We looked at it, but it didn't make much sense economically for us, the way it worked.
Right. I think the burden became, it was almost as if the stores were paying for the shoppers' property tax.
Oh, that's not right. Yeah, no.
It was not attractive to us to administer it, and it wasn't attractive to our customers to participate.
Right. Well, then
no, and I don't know of anyone that really thought it was wonderful, except for one entity on Rock Road who thought this was the best thing since sliced bread.
It was no longer there.
And he's no longer there. So we can talk about it. So if Frank's Floors really thought this was going to be a game changer.
And in his case, it was something good because he dealt in big ticket items.
Right.
For that.
Yeah. This is more of like a rewards program. So
I know exactly what you're speaking to. And I written through all of my, we get this magazine called the New Jersey Municipalities, and it's sponsored through the league, and every month they have like different stories. And as I read through it and I see something interesting, I always tear it out, and then I have it on my board, and I have like a list of things. So when we have our public meetings and I need a topic, I'm like, oh, hey, I read this in the league and this town did this. Let's talk about this tonight. And I did see one, exactly what you're describing about the bucks. And they did that through COVID to help buffer. Oh God, give me 1 second. Hold on. Okay. So it's got to be here.
Yeah, sure. There are a couple of towns that have done something similar, but the whole idea is to be self-reinforcing to the downtown areas and try to, as Jim was saying, create the
right. But the thing about it was who pays for it. And at that time, I think maybe that specific community took CARES Act money that they were going to be reimbursed for, and they put that towards that one-time promotion, we'll call it. And I thought it was beautifully done, but I don't know that Glen Rock is in a position that we could take that risk. We weren't sure what we were going to get reimbursed for with CARES. I mean, everything was happening so on the fly throughout COVID. And with the CARES Act reimbursement, we were told it was only for PPE and then special, if you had an employee that was designated to handle whatever COVID, that portion of salary could go to that. Right. So that never even crossed our mind. And then to see it, the story about it after the fact, it was like, oh.
It's still viable. I mean, so it's on the list, Becky. You might want to talk about other things too, but it's definitely those kind of creative. And I think, frankly, especially as I mentioned at the top of the call, the abundance of cash on hand and revenue generation at the state level, I think getting creative. I think mayors, at the county level and county with the state should be advocating for things like this. This is a great direct use of trying to eliminate programs, don't create overhead and bureaucracy. It's a way to get cash into people's hands and get businesses going again and customers through the door, like I said.
Well, here's that balancing act, right? We want to encourage business and offer these probably short-term programs, whatever they may be, and maybe it's coming from a federal source or a state source. But then when that dries up, it gets a little dicey. So you want to encourage the business for somebody like Jim, even for somebody like Nick, who's, people are coming and maybe they have a little extra cash in their hand. They can plan, they can start to do some things they couldn't do before. But then the money starts to dry up. And if you're offering an incentive for businesses, some kind of a tax holiday or whatever, what does the municipality do now when they go to balance their budget? They need to still keep things coming in. And I know when you offer tax holidays, it usually does stimulate more buying, as long as it gets right directly to the consumer. So I want to kind of explore that a little bit. What happens when big money dries up?
You're right to worry about the continual nature of the funding. But I'm also thinking that as far as downtown business is concerned, we'd like to see more people there. Many of these tax breaks we're talking about require some kind of state help. The state sales tax, I haven't noticed anybody in Trenton willing to turn that back over to the towns. So we have to find ways to do it locally. And Kristine, one of the things that you do have in the borough council is you have the property taxes and the ability to create special development areas and areas where you can give property breaks. That would be something that could be used as long as you were giving it to landlords to reduce rents, to bring in new tenants. And new tenants coming in, new businesses come in. A business comes in on a 3 to 5 year lease usually in the beginning. And over that period of time, they're planning on developing their business. They need some certainty as to what their rentals are going to be, and that they build that into the business plan, and they try to get people to come in the door. The more businesses are doing that, the more likely you're going to have the walk-in traffic. The stimulus could come from the town and working with the landlords, just to find a way to make it attractive for a business to locate in Glen Rock, as opposed to Ridgewood or Fairlawn or Wyckoff or someplace else, to say, okay, the town has this infrastructure and has this incentive. How can we use that to develop my business plan?
And there was a key thing that you said, bragging about Glen Rock as it stands. And I know, Kristine, during the pandemic, that the borough did have the Restart program, which I thought was really cool. It drew attention. It wasn't hugely costly or anything like that, but it was the council and the government kind of saying, hey, we're restarting, we're here. You had all the small signs. I wonder if stuff like a little bit of more of that could be done, because we have some good, strong business groups in Glen Rock, and you guys could even challenge us and say, hey, we had this thought or idea, what do you think of it? And them partnering. Is that a huge deal for the borough to do? I know you have a lot on your plate, but is it a huge deal for you guys?
The Restart wasn't that heavy of a lift. That was basically, we sought to make sure that the residents knew our businesses were still here, and God damn it, we have to support them, because these are our people, and I remember, Jim, Curious Reader, they had a wonderful, you could call or email and tell them, sorry, the dog, the names or the ages of your children, and they would curate a collection of books, and you would pay online and it would be delivered to your home.
Yep.
And it was beautiful. And from that, I think then it grew into a more of a community event where like Grins took over. So there was a group of residents that came together, collected money. They used the money they collected to buy food from the local restaurants, which they then brought to the healthcare workers. They raised tens of thousands and thousands of dollars. And it was like never ending. And I think there was such a feeling of camaraderie that we wanted to make sure that our businesses knew we were with them and that we supported them. And I know, like for myself going forward, we've got birthday parties up the wazoo. I have twins and they're 7. So there's like a birthday party every weekend. And not only do I have one kid going, I've got 2. It's a lot of presents you have to buy. I could easily go on Amazon and have it shipped here and it'd be easy for me. But I've made it a point since the pandemic, probably started before the pandemic, but definitely since, you can go check your books, Jim. Every party my kids go to, we bring a gift certificate from the Curious Reader.
We know whenever a kid's having a birthday party because we can track them through the gift registers.
Right, but I just felt that's important. You know, I'm doing my part not only to, you know, promote literacy and reading as a fundamental privilege and a wonderful, thing that kids have in their lives, but at the same time, I'm also showing my support for local business. And then when it comes to my older friends, I always get my mother-in-law, you know, a gift card for the nail salon or the hair salon.
Loving
that.
that.
Yeah, and that was super important. But interestingly enough, you know, you guys are talking about what can the town do. I read through our last master plan reexamination, and then there's the master plan was done in 2002. We had a reexam 2008, 2014, and they all keep coming back to this consideration for a special improvement district. It's a long-term plan in the short term, and it's a wonderful idea. And unfortunately, because of COVID and all of these other curveballs that I've been ducking since I took office back a year ago, January, we didn't really have time to really bite into this and see what we would need.
That's Regina can really talk to this. Especially
but before you do, I just want to also state that I go to seminars all the time, and we go to the league, and they have, you know, small work groups, and I always go to the ones about economic revitalization. They love to point to the towns like Morristown and the Renaissance that they had, or look at, you know, Montclair is always, you know, like the flagship for what you should be aspiring to. And all of them seem to focus on one crucial point, that your downtown needs an identity. What is the theme of your downtown?
Main Street, the Main Street idea.
Well, it's, you know, when you think of Ridgewood, it's the restaurants. When you think of Westwood, they have, like Jim was saying earlier, Glen Rock used to have clothing stores. I remember I shopped at Mandy's when I was in high school. Westwood has amazing clothing stores in Westwood. Glen Rock, our theme is disjointed, but with additions like the Curious Reader, like Color and Whim, and these specialty niche stores, that could be the impetus to starting this theme.
I could give you an idea, Kristine. It's something I kicked around. Curious Reader is obviously geared towards children. There are a number of other places. We're probably the only town in the area that has a bookstore for children and a toy shop for children down at the other end of the grocery. We also have some karate dens. We have a bunch of mathnasium. We have Kuman. We could, and this is something I promote at the chamber all the time, suggest that it's a plan we could try and pull together, is we could promote Glen Rock as a kid's place because of the number of children businesses we have, which would, if we started advertising it that way, would draw in others, which would be good for the downtown, good for the village.
Where does that leave our seniors? And this is a kind of like when you think about the idea of planning, I wonder if Regina, if there's like a depository of ideas like this where there's plans that you can say, okay, we're going to focus 30% of our business on seniors, maybe 50% on children, and then another 20 on whatever else, you know, we can think of, maybe like the old, somebody that fixes, we have a time keeper guy in our, who fixes clocks, who I use all the time because I love clocks, as I mentioned.
So he's gone.
He is not.
Yeah, the time, that shop is no longer there.
Timekeeper?
He's in another town. He's not in that building anymore.
See, that's new. So what I'm asking Regina is for kind of a plan, if in the think tank, is there something like that, or do you know something about that statewide?
Yeah, actually, what Jim and Kristine are talking about is a state program. And it's, as you just said, a special improvement district. And what it is, it creates a separate entity from the government that's funded both by the local businesses and the government, but it gives special authority. And I think, Jim, that's what you were trying to talk about, right? It gives you tools, and it permits, so really, Becky, to your question, to create an identity, right? And give you tools that, you can pursue to address what you think whether it's cleaning up, right? Doing storefronts. It could be a whole rent, as you articulated, like on the lease side, giving support on the rent side. So it just gives more flexibility. So it's not so much government bureaucracy, but there's also investment from the business side, so that it's a real tangible partnership between the two. And it's a tool, and the DCA, the department at Stratton is really the one that oversees that, and Treasury is involved in it as well. But it's a great tool. And Kristine, I'd be happy to talk with you after the call and, see if we can connect you up with others if you want to really, look at that. Because I do think it should be, so you're concerned about the state not sharing the sales tax. I totally agree. In fact, I remember there are certain taxes that were taken away from towns when I was on the township committee, right? They used to be collected by the town, and now the state takes it. So, but I think this is a great opportunity, especially as, there's, as they say, cash available now. I think they're looking for creative ways to put it in control of the local entities to help the towns recover.
Why, before I get to one, we have a question from the public, but I want to ask Nick a little something. Nick, in your experience with dealing with seniors and this kind of planning and their children, what are things that you think would really attract people to keep them in Glen Rock, so that they say, I'm not going to automatically move out? And I know not everybody automatically moves out, right? They have children here, they have family here, but with the taxes, it is a draw to go someplace else. So what do you think that your clientele and seniors and planners come to you, what would keep them here?
So many of my clients, they come to do their planning with their kids, right? Mm-hmm. And, family, and especially in Glen Rock, and I live in Waldwick, your community is so important to you, right? And having that downtown area, vibrant area to go, where it's not, some dead, nothing's happening, right? But you can actually go down to the Glen Rock Inn and have lunch and walk down the street with your grandmother or whoever. Yes, it may not tie directly to your retirement if there's a vibrant downtown, right? But if you have that thing to do, right? Like I would go out with my grandmother and we'd go to lunch and then we'd walk around the street just as something to do for a half hour, right? Something to get her out of her long-term care facility or wherever she was at that time. So yeah, it's super important that there's a vibrant, downtown, that's somewhere you want to be, right? If people don't want to be in Glen Rock now, you're not going to want to retire in Glen Rock, right? I mean, it's as simple as that, right? So it's not just like one thing. We can't, throw out the baby with the bathwater. We can't just say, forget about the business because we're worried about people retiring, or we can't just worry about businesses and forget about it's all encompassing, right? It's the community as a whole has to be what the mindset is, right? And the downtown is part of it, right? Affordable living is part of it. I think they all have to work together, which makes Kristine's job and Regina's job figuring this all out so difficult, right? But that's why they get paid the big bucks.
Well, I
just got my check for $900. I get paid quarterly.
$900. Hold on.
It was a nonprofit.
Hey, you should go work for a school board. We get zippity.
Exactly.
Hey, listen, you guys.
All right. Well, then it's your fault for joining in and trying to figure it out. Now do it for free.
So here's it, and so I'm going to kind of pile on here, Kristine. The question that came in was, what is being done about consolidating services? So if, the municipality does something, are you working with the schools? And can the DPW kind of do double duty, maybe pull in some funds from another entity within the town so they don't have to hire a whole new entity? What's your thought on that as far as Glen Rock is concerned?
I mean, shared services is fantastic. We do have a shared service with the schools for the maintenance of the fields, something to do with the trash collection over there. And then we went a step further. last year we went, or 2 years ago, was I mayor yet, or did I promote this? I worked with Wyckoff, and we did a shared service for our court administrator, because at the time there was talk about consolidating the courts.
You were the council.
I was on the
covered that.
council.
I remember
So
that.
we started, and I reached out, you know, being a council member, you meet other council members, and working in a law office at the time, it was easy to make these connections. So we merged with Wyckoff and we became home base. So Wyckoff, their tickets were written by Wyckoff Police Department, but they were heard in Glen Rock Court by our judge, and the payments were made to our administrator. So then we were able to give her the raise that she wanted, because let me tell you, a lot of our borough employees are grossly underpaid for the job they provide, and it's hard to keep good employees. And then we expanded that last year with Ridgewood. Now, our court administrator will go to Ridgewood's court. They'll hold court in their courtrooms in Ridgewood. Oh, and Wyckoff does too, sorry. So their judge still goes to Wyckoff to court and Ridgewood, but our court administrator works both of those areas. So now we split her cost amongst 3 towns. But the real only way you're going to save any type of significant money is if you were to share services for a police department, for a fire department, for first responders, because those are the big revenue, not revenue, they're the big expenses that we have. A police department is huge. And a lot of these states, you know, everyone's like, oh, I'm moving to Florida, the taxes are so much cheaper. Well, yeah, because not every town has its own school district, its own police department, its own fire department, ambulance. A lot of them are done on a county level. And there's always been talk around, you know, that someday we're all going to just be all gobbled up into the county and the county's going to run everything. That would be really good from a financial standpoint, but from a public safety and I'm not saying it's the correct one, but people will feel like, oh, if I don't have my local police department, it's going to take too long if there's a problem. And
this, Kristine, this, I know, Regina, you must have insight on. My thing is, when I was talking a little bit before, kind of like a base of understanding how we can do these things properly. The idea of home rule, the idea of wanting to know your police. Really, I don't want to have my police coming from Mawa if it's a Bergen County thing. Like, I know it wouldn't be that far away, I totally get it, but you know, you get worried because taxes are so high and they have to do something. So in the state, thinking of everything, are there plans or ideas, and they don't have to come from the state, obviously, we can push and suggest this. What would be, what is some of the thinking going on now to consolidate this without totally losing home rule?
Yeah, identity. So it's obviously, we all know it's been a subject of discussion in our state for, you know, decades, and that some of us have participated in. So I'll say a couple of things on this. You know, one is, I think there's an enormous reaction to the word consolidate because that feels like less, right? And it's far away and I won't be able to have control. And, you know, we've been talking about really the idea of service metrics getting delivered in towns as opposed to individuals being employed by the town. So Kristine, you know, and Jim, right, the example of officer response time, crime rates, ambulance response times. Those are the things that if you can manage, like you are doing with the shared court, right? There's a certain amount of volume they have to put through. There's a certain amount of, you know, expense that they're held to. If we can think about these services and what needs to get delivered and where is the greatest, you know, center of excellence. I'll give you like a very minor example, but something that, you know, each town has to contemplate about. What are the things that are most important that I control in my town versus things that are more a commodity? So I come from a town that is all well and septic. So the water quality management is essential to the, you know, home property values and our lifestyle. So that's like something that we'll always want to keep nearby to us. But when you think about other more commodity functions like tax collection, like, you know, some of these functions that feel very risky to get involved with, like police response time, but we've seen models, and I you know, there's other counties, I won't, you know, name them, you know, tonight. They're neither yours nor mine, but other counties have had models that really speak to like precincts, right? So a town continues to have officers who know their town, have the town's name on their squad cars, and they understand where the streets are and the people are, but they're managed more like at a county level. And that's really where all the overhead is. And when you think about it, New York City is really, right, one police commissioner with many precincts. And if you think about that model of you're managing at lower level, but it's, what matters is how quickly they respond and how do they keep crime low. And so I've been advocating, and frankly, Senator Sweeney has been one of the strongest advocates, right, of looking at opportunities like this. And I think that if you think about it, if we approach it, I should say, not so much as tearing apart towns, but really separating functions and figuring out where do mayors and the local, DPW create the most value, what can really get created at a higher level, whether it's county, region, or state.
As you know, Regina, Senator Sweeney is a big hero of mine, and because of what he's done, being intimately involved in schools. The case study of New Jersey schools is insanity. We have over 500 districts, some of which have thousands of kids. Just in the locally, we have 6,000 in Ridgewood, you have 2,500 in Glen Rock, but we also have districts that have 100 people. You go over just to our neighbor in Hohokus, they have one school. If you walk in the front door, you go left, you see the principal's office, you go right, you see a superintendent's suite. Yep. These make no sense. Senator Sweeney has been doing some great things trying to promote this. He's running up against localism in its complete and outrageousness. I'm old enough to remember Ridgewood a number of years ago, 20, 25 years ago, decided it would consolidate the 911 system. Yes. And we're going to, I don't remember how many towns, 3 or 4 towns. Now, this is a telephone operator who's going to relay the messages to the police department. It was like you were taking away all the protection from Ridgewood or Fairlawn, everywhere. You're going to kill the kids. This is going to be awful. The only way I've come to believe that we're going to have very much meaningful consolidation of the big ticket items. The big ticket items being the educational administration, the police, sanitation, and fires, where we have those departments that are not universal around, is if the state starts really pushing it. Senator Sweeney has got some pilot programs he's trying to put to incentivize school districts to get some of these littler districts, these K through 8. I think we actually have a K through 5 district in New Jersey. Some ridiculous situations, merge them with a sister district, and it'll improve the quality of the kids' education. It'll cut down the overhead. But this is something I'm not quite sure. Kristine, I was very interested to hear about what you're doing with the court administrators, and to the extent we can get those things done, that's great. But as you know, court administrator is, I don't know what you're paying in Glen Rock, but I can't imagine it's more than $100,000 a year expense you're dealing with, and you combine it with
benefits plus an assistant.
All right, but you combine it. You're not talking about the money you're talking about with the police department or in Ridgewood, the fire department. Those are really big ticket items. Yeah. The more we can do that locally, it's good, but I think it's going to take to get a monumental shift. It's going to take a lot of support from the state.
Yeah. Well, and to your point, if you don't want, just one last point on the school thing, you're totally right about Senator Sweeney. And I think that, if you can start to separate, like I was saying, on the mayors thinking about where do I really create value in my local government, same thing on the school. I mean, those school boards, as you and I both know, having served there, right, worrying about the curriculum. And when you're an ascending district, how do you line up the curriculums? How do you really deal with the personnel? That's really an important role of localism in school boards, not the financials. Those ought to be, the maintenance of the schools, the building of the schools, the school buses, by the way. We did a whole study. If we did school busing at a higher level, we'd save hundreds of millions of dollars instead of 650 school bus contracts. So, I'd love to talk about this all night. I won't, of course, but I totally underline.
I feel you, because I feel a little bit of that too. I have one more question, and then I want to just end by each panelist, if you could just give us a final thought. But let's deal with this one question here, a very local question. I'm unclear how a tax holiday will help local businesses in a small town like Glen Rock. Wouldn't it be applied to big box stores as well? Would it be applied town by town? So they're talking about kind of like an estate down, but I don't know, Kristine, would you want to speak to that? How would a tax holiday help small business in Glen Rock?
Honestly, I don't even know if I can speak to that because I don't control. There is no local tax imposed by Glen Rock. So this is the state tax.
The state thinks so.
Exactly. Why don't you let me try? Because it
You
can be,
go, Regina.
yeah, it can be constructed any way the state is willing to do it. In fact, we have in New Jersey things called UEZs, which are special areas in New Jersey that only charge half the tax rate now. So the state can construct this. You couldn't, Kristine, on your own, but the state could construct it. And to the question about business size, it could be only businesses that collect, say, under $10,000 a year or $10,000 a month. You can define it. The state could help by defining it any way they want. They just have to be creative. And they are, I think, frankly, I think they would be very open to it right now because it is a time when they're trying to assist businesses to create more foot traffic. And so it's not Kristine's, it's really, so I've been advocating to create something that will help small businesses and not the big box that your question was asking about.
Yeah, since I was the one that was suggesting it, and I'm thinking more that the one tax that the municipality does control is the property taxes. And the property taxes can be, as you know, with Glen Court, there can be holidays or there can be rebates or reductions in specific things to target certain things. And I agree with you completely. You can make it very targeted to small business. You do it by square footage. You could do it by volume, and a number of different factors you could build in. Coupled with the fact that, as Kristine pointed out, there's not a whole lot of space in Glen Rock to throw up a Best Buy. We don't have anything unless they're going to do it out in the Nabisco plant.
Oh no, that's ours.
Which is Fairlawn.
Oh, that's Fairlawn's? Okay.
Fairlawn.
We don't even have that. I forgot
Don't
that.
even have that.
Oh, all right. Well, so unless we're going to build it over the railroad tracks.
So I want to kind of start to end out here, and I want to just leave you with these final thoughts, and I want to go around to each panelist. I'm going to start with Nick, and I want to say, based on what you've heard tonight, do you think it really is viable to retire here in Glen Rock? What would you say to that?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I think that what you heard here is that, you know, people are working towards making it possible to retire in Glen Rock, right? And I think that's the goal, right? People who are in their 30s up to people who are in their 70s, 80s, 90s, whatever, you know, if the goal is to make it so people can retire here and we want to reach that goal, we can reach that goal. We just have to be creative and work towards all of the different pieces that make it so that we can reach that goal. So I think the short answer is yes. I think that people will be able to retire here if they want to retire here.
Jim, what about you? What do you think?
Well, I think people will want to retire here. Nick is right. You have to do planning and make sure you can afford to retire here because we're an expensive venue. But the community of Glen Rock is a fantastic community. It's close-knit. It wants to support its businesses. It wants to support seniors. It wants to support schools. All these things, you have that sense of community, which makes, as a retired person, that makes something you want to be part of. That's why when I retired, I opened a bookstore in Glen Rock with my daughter because I knew that kind of community spirit exists. And you have people like Kristine, although I'm envious of her $900 a quarter salary, which we got none of that at the school board. But
I spend it all at your store, so it's all good.
That's good. We like it. But we have volunteerism that is strong in Glen Rock. We have people willing to do things for other people and come out and do stuff. And when I was talking before, making it a kid's place, kids and grandparents tend to go together. And they tend to, if you have a strong downtown, as you all know, 2 years ago, we put on that author festival. We'll do that again this year. And we're expecting strong support from the town because it's a special event that only Glen Rock has. Even Morristown dropped theirs this year. So I think it's a great place to retire. People have to think about how they're going to afford it. But once they do, this is a place to be.
Well, Kristine, you just got some cheers there. So what do you think about all this? Can people retire here?
Well, I'm in a very unique situation. So my family moved into Glen Rock in 1920. I became mayor of Glen Rock 100 years after my first relative moved into town. My great-grandparents, my grandmother was born here, my father was born here, I was born here. I see why people would want to stay. And going to be creepy. The only way my family is left is when they've, you know, left. So, and I have my kids now, and I want them to get that sense of community. And like Jim said, our residents are so passionate, and you give them a mission and they are on it, and they collect themselves, they organize, and they get stuff done. So I think with that spirit in mind, and Jim, I want to talk to you about the children's, because you look at nursing homes, they always say you should bring in, you know, your little Girl Scout troops or your Brownie or Boy Scouts, because the elderly love to be around the little kids. It makes them feel young, and it gives them another sense of purpose. I mean, I'm willing to put a splash pad in the middle of the alcove at this point, you know, whatever we can do to just build on that theme.
Worms there, lady.
Well, we'll see. We can figure it out. But I love where that discussion led. And I am looking forward, Regina, I'm going to definitely be reaching out to you, is, you know, I have it already in my head, and I'm 45 this year, and I've already have my will done. I have my estate planning already in order. And maybe that's the key. Start them younger, you know, and have my fellow, you know, moms at pickup be doing the same. I think it is possible to retire in Glen Rock, and I think planning is key. And I think also embracing all that, you know, just the passion and the fire behind the residents as we are now.
Well, I appreciate that. And Regina,
vote for Braden, who wants to run the second that he's old enough. My son is, you know, already committed to becoming the next mayor when I'm done.
So, you know, Regina, when you hear this kind of passion, I mean, it's kind of nice, you know, that's why right next door, I got involved in Glen Rock, and I live in Fairlawn, but it's, you know, it's such a great community, and everything they're saying, whenever there's a project, woohoo, watch out. You got people coming out of the woodwork to help. So on a statewide level, do you see a lot of that? Is all of Jersey like that? Or are we special, you know, because we kind of are? Or what do you think about that?
Well, Glen Rock is, of course, special. You know, there's no doubt about
it.
Good
answer.
Good answer, Regina.
Good.
But you do, I mean, to the point of, there's enormous, I mean, there's a reason why, you know, there were expressions over all of our lifetimes, like Jersey proud, right? And, you know, Jersey strong, because there is a sense of enormous commitment to the lifestyle and the quality of life in our state. And many of us, I mean, I'm born and raised in New Jersey as well, and educated through college in New Jersey. And there's a sense of wanting to be able to hand that down to our children and enable them to be here, which is why retirement, of course, comes up. And, you know, of course, I want to say thank you to all the conversations tonight, because what our role is, what we're trying to accomplish at GSI is to figure out how to, you know, translate some of the state, you know, mystery, you know, what goes on behind this curtain, you know, up in Trenton, as to how it can help local towns, what are the issues of the local towns, and then take what's going on in local towns back to Trenton, so that, to our example of the tax holiday, right? How can both parties win? When there is, you know, overperformance in sales tax, why not deliver it back to small businesses that we all agree are hurting? So it's been extremely helpful to me to be able to translate some of the, you know, what we see at big numbers, about 30% of the restaurants closing, into very specific examples in Glen Rock. And, you know, I'll try to help. Kristine, you and I will talk. I'd love, you know.
Look what I found. It was Glassboro.
Yeah, there are other towns as well that, you know, that have done the bucks. Yeah.
I told you I had it. I really do what I say I'm doing.
So Becky, thanks for, you know, helping, you know, host all this tonight. And I look forward to maybe a follow-up conversation to see how things are going.
You know what? It's been a blast. We did one in Fairlawn last week, and this week in Glen Rock. You guys really do have the great passion for this town. And I think we all have a mindset of what can we do to make things better. Even if things were awesome already, which they're pretty awesome now, but things can always get better. So I so appreciate this conversation, and everybody that signed in tonight to listen. I'm sure I'll get a lot of email feedback as well, but we will have a recording of this, and I will write it a wrap up on TAPinto, and it'll be out there. So thank you so much, everybody, for joining us. I really appreciate it. Great conversation. I hope we can keep having these and have some more.
And I'll see you tomorrow. I have to pick up a gift certificate. We have a party on Saturday.
Okay. See you later.